Well, welcome. This is our second part of our 21 Days in Philippians series. And what I love about Philippians is that although Paul is a brilliant intellectual, he starts his letter with huge emotion. And it's emotion in spite of his circumstances. So he's writing from a prison in Rome where he's awaiting trial and execution. He's writing to a Philippian church, a town in modern-day Greece, that had loads of issues. One of their issues was disunity. Others, they were arguing and had disagreements within the church. But you know what? Paul is joyful because he hears reports about them and he's just filled with encouragement and a sense of togetherness, partnership with them. And so he writes this letter and he's basically just encouraging them in their faith. And this situation is very similar to many situations that Christians today find themselves in. You know, we've all got our various struggles and issues, but in spite of these, as we take a step back, we can see that we ourselves are growing in the gospel, and the gospel is spreading through us too. And just like Paul was with the Philippians, we can be astounded and joyful at what the gospel has done in us and through us, both as individuals, but also as a church in partnership together. So the first thing that verse 3 to 6 tells us is that we are to rejoice in God's work today. So Paul writes this: I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from that first day until now. Basically, the Philippian church had an unimpressive beginning. It had started with a handful of women who culturally were insignificant and a local pagan jailer. And yet out of that small nucleus of oddly mixed people, God caused a wonderful, thriving church to grow. And here, around 12 years later, when this letter was written, they were mission-minded enough and pastoral enough to send Paul a gift and to minister to his needs in jail. So Paul's overflowing with emotion because of them. He's seen them grow in number and maturity since that very first day when he sat down at a river and taught a bunch of women about the gospel. And Paul rejoices because of what he's witnessed. It's God's hand at work in his people ever since those early days. And today, as we look around us, many of us will bear witness to the gospel growing in us personally and corporately together. Sometimes our faith has grown quickly in knowledge or obedience to Christ. At other times, we've struggled in those areas. But bottom line is, God's kingdom is growing. God is driving that growth. And we can rejoice in it as partners in the gospel. But the second thing, what Paul says in these verses, is that we're to rejoice because God's work is not going to stop. Let me read verse 6 to you. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. His great truth here is this: God will finish what he started. So there's no sense in which God is going to go, what have I done? I'm appalled at saving that person. I'm going to unsave them quickly. He's not going to go, oh, they're just not cutting the mustard. I'm going to cut them from the team. I'm sorry. No, listen, God's not like that. He's not going to give up his work in us. He's deliberately chosen us. And he's going to finish his work in us. And that's the foundation for Paul's joy. God's not going to drop the ball. He's going to finish what he started. So, at the heart of these verses is Paul's big point. Partnership in the gospel is about looking back and rejoicing in what God has done and what he is doing, and to rejoice because God's not going to stop that work. We need to hear these verses today because it's easy to forget the wonder of the gospel around us. But Paul says, take a step back. Look at what the gospel has done in you, in your church, to save you and to draw you together till Christ returns. Now that, my brothers and sisters, is a joy worth writing about.